2026, Pokémon is going to be 30 years old. From Red, Blue and Green, through 9 generations to Scarlet and Violet, Pokémon has of course had to constantly tweak and modernise their games and add new features. On this channel, we often talk about how Pokémon is the biggest IP in the world, how the various waves of Pokemania since the 90s have captured the imagination of the entire planet, and how despite the chronic complaining from the community, Pokemon sales are looking healthier than ever. But has Pokemon lost its touch? Have Game Freak lost sight of what made their games so successful in the first place? Well, no. And also, yes, it's complicated. In this video, we're going to explore how and why Pokemon has changed, and some key things that Game Freak needs to do in Legends Z-A and beyond to keep themselves at the top of their game. Before we get into it, if you enjoy this video, please hit the subscribe button. I'm really hoping to hit 4,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and your click could make all the difference. Please do leave a like, and now let's talk about the changes we want to see in Pokemon in the future. There is no doubt that Pokemon is still an extremely engaging and fun game. People care, and honestly I think people always will. The core gameplay concepts, the escapism, the adventure, the execution of the creature and character designs. So why are we seeing frustrations about the main series games? Well, let me tell you a secret. It's nothing new. I consider myself an old man when it comes to Pokemon. I was around for Gen 1, as I'm sure many of you watching were too. I remember walking around the UK seeing Blastoise and Charizard posters everywhere, advertising Red and Blue. My parents bought me the toys, the cards, the manga, posters, the VHS tapes, and of course, the games. So we lived through this. Each generation of Pokemon has been extremely successful, without exception, but never perfect, and that's a good thing. There's always room for improvement. So let's zone into the most recent games in Gen 8 and 9. What are truly the biggest issues with Pokemon on the Switch? Well, I can only speak from my experience, but balance is important. And the first thing I want to point out is, I had a lot of fun. I applaud the transition to a true console RPG in Gen 9, and the more open world feel. I respect the fact that we have different kinds of boss battles now. I enjoyed the themes within the stories, and I think they did a pretty good job setting the series on course to some big key features that feel so right for Pokemon. Let's Go mode, the multiplayer improvements, the synchro machine, the interesting ways we ended up visiting legacy regions, kind of. However, upon release, there is no doubt that Scarlet and Violet were broken, unfinished games. More so than any main series Pokemon game I have ever played before. Here's a clip of me on release day playing through Violet and instantly being met with a glitch. Hang on. Right on, wait. What is happening? What is happening? And people saw far worse than this. That's just scratching the surface. We've all seen viral clips of the gameplay glitches that people experienced, and there's no doubt that this was a new thing on such a mass scale. We've really never seen an unfinished Pokemon game in this way before, when it comes to affecting the execution of the gameplay, the visuals, and the performance. So from everything they've learned, from all the feedback, what can Game Freak do to make sure the next batch of games, Legends Z-A and Gen 10, are going to go down well with fans? Firstly, the games have to be ready for release. As we just saw, Scarlet and Violet were not, and you can partly put this down to this being Game Freak's first attempt at a truly open world game, although Legends Arceus might have something to say about that. But I think the games were just released too soon to hit the self-imposed deadlines, and it simply didn't give the developers the time they needed to finesse and refine the games. Game Freak have a weirdly small amount of staff for the size of their company and the impact their games have, possibly to stay true to their roots and not to have too many cooks, but I think this has caused issues with the execution for some of the Switch games in different ways. But they are hiring right now for a bunch of roles that make it seem like they are trying to improve the finesse of their products. Delaying Scarlet and Violet by 6 or even 3 months would have made a big positive impact. Game Freak can't undo the experience people had with the Scarlet and Violet glitches. That's firmly embedded into people's minds as a core early Gen 9 memory now. And sure, over time they've patched things and made the game look and function better in the DLC era, and I understand that in the modern landscape of gaming, that is a genuine approach by some developers now. But Gen 9 felt like a sandbox. You couldn't enter 95% of the map's buildings, the terrain didn't really differentiate enough to make you feel things, and the execution of the mechanics like climbing and flying was awkward and laggy. It regressed from Legends Arceus in a lot of ways, whilst progressing in other more ideological ways. But I have a feeling if we see another unfinished game on release on that scale, there could be some direct repercussions on sales. And Game Freak know that. Luckily, it's a good sign that Game Freak seem to have taken 2024 as a blank year and are recruiting staff to get this next game or two right. And that immersion in the map that was always felt from the Game Boy era has to be recaptured in a similar way to Legends Arceus, but go even further. And following on from this point, the animations have to be good. The battle animations and general feel of the battles are sort of the core ingredients to the gameplay. And it must be said, Scarlet and Violet did a better job at some of the smaller details, like differentiating trainers in the region so they're not just blatantly copy and pasted trainer classes, and that makes things a lot more immersive. But you've probably seen viral clips of some of the move and battle animations themselves in Scarlet and Violet being compared to games that came 10, even 20 years prior, like Stadium, Colosseum, XD, and Battle Revolution. They are way more cinematic, and the repetitive looped trainer animations that are basically emotes in Scarlet and Violet really don't work for me. But there are a few factors to consider here as to why this is the case. Firstly, those self-imposed deadlines we alluded to earlier definitely impact the development time. And secondly, even though the modern animations might be more visually underwhelming than they once were, the speed of them now often being quicker than previously helps the flow of gameplay and the feel of the battle progressing. Secondly, despite Dexit and Move Exit, there are more Pokemon and moves to animate now, I suppose. But there's a really good solution to all of this. Pokemon sell so many copies, and people have different preferences. Personally, I would love a 3-option system within the game options. Battle animations could be set to either cinematic, regular, or off. Cinematic for a more immersive spectacle. So Hyper Beam and Dragon Ascent, for example, get the screen time and epic feel they deserve. Just look at the cinematic stuff that some modders have been able to do in the BDSP engine as their passion projects. Regular would pretty much be the quicker version, like what we have now, in favour of a balance of atmosphere and speed. And off speaks for itself, where you'd see nothing but a hit marker and no animation at all, which weirdly used to be an option, but Gen 9 decided to remove it, amongst other things which we'll get onto in a second. But I think this would be a perfect way to play the game how you want to. And yes, it might create the need for 2 animations to be designed per move, but I think the vast majority of people would rather wait and see something like this than have no customization at all. And that is exactly my next point, customization. And this one is really important, not just customization of our characters and sandwiches, I mean fundamental customization options for the actual gameplay experience. Tutorials have gotten out of hand in recent times, especially for veteran players. I think it's vital they make the tutorials truly optional, or just give us something we can read from our bag if we choose to, or if we get stuck. Pokemon in its purest form used to have a brief 2-minute text-based introductory scene with the professor of the region, where you'd put your name in before the game dropped you into a world you could pretty much get straight into and explore. You pick your starter Pokemon, grab a Pokedex from the professor, and say goodbye to your mum of course, then it's go time. And they can still include some tone-setting story stuff in the midst of doing this, but the quick starts were the glory days. Since Gen 6, the tutorial periods of the game seem to have gotten progressively worse, not only because they're longer, but because they're actually less engaging and way more handholdy. Gen 7 was probably the worst offender for this, but even Scarlet and Violet was pretty bad for it as well. It takes a long while before you actually get to the point of picking which of the 3 questlines you want to start. Even if they tried to integrate the tutorial section within the gameplay a bit more this time and give us the illusion of freedom. Really, it's the text box chatter that makes it a slog, and we'll come on to how that can be solved in a minute. But I understand why they like to have a tutorial section for newer players, or even just to get players used to the slightly updated mechanics of a new gen. But at the very least, they need to give us a choice, make it optional. And with that, the same goes for other unwanted bonuses, should you want to give yourself a challenge, or if you're doing a new playthrough for example. Allow us to turn the experience share off if we want that challenge. Allow us to turn the friendship-based perks like surviving on 1 HP off. Give us back set mode so we don't get a switching advantage in battle. That's one of the most fundamental difficulty sliders that's been in every Pokemon game up until Gen 9. And that's the frustrating part about this. All of these used to be optional, but for some reason, Gen 9 decided to force all players to have the same experience with this stuff. I don't know whose decision that was, but it was a bad one. No one's asking to remove it, just make it optional. Another big way they can improve future titles for me is through voice acting. It's time. Now I understand this would be a big deal. Pokemon dialogue has been text-based for its entire existence, well apart from the anime of course, but executed well, this could make a huge difference. Pokemon stories actually tackle some really big themes and storylines, whether it's a nihilistic artificial powerhouse Pokemon rebelling against its creators, an evil mastermind manipulating the Pokemon responsible for the fabric of the universe and bending them to his will, corporate corruption, civilization-ending weapons, hostile interdimensional aliens, human genocide, grief and animal cruelty. The list goes on, and sometimes reading all these story beats through text boxes just don't cut it, especially on a system like the Switch. Now to be fair to Pokemon, the cutscenes always add that little bit of atmosphere and make things feel epic or emotional, but imagine the dynamic range of human emotions in a voice performance that could bring out so much more from those story beats. It could be, again, if done well, a really huge addition. I think many of us can get tired of those text boxes from time to time, and something like Legends, which is more of a sub-series, could be a great place to experiment with this and see how it goes down. And lastly, something I've spoken about in my last few videos, the ability to interchange between controlling your trainer and your Pokemon. The fully realised version of the Battle Bond and Synchro Machine feature that's actually necessary in-game. It could be the true 3D realisation of the classic HM system combined with the Rider Pokemon system we've seen in recent games. Imagine if all the HMs became truly inherent techniques that all Pokemon have based on their type and design, not just exclusive to Miraidon and Koraidon or even a select few noble Pokemon, but truly a diverse 3D Pokemon experience where having access to particular Pokemon opens up different paths and secrets. Need a rock smashing? Send your Machoke out. Control it and break the rock yourself. Need that item across the lava? Send your Flareon out to go and grab it. Want to catch that Diglett but it keeps running away underground? Send your Sandshrew out. Dig into the ground and chase it. Surfing and flying speak for themselves, but there are so many ways this could be implemented. Come on Pokemon, Bibarel has been dreaming about this for years. So I've covered the main improvements that I'd like to see in the next Pokemon games, but what do you think? Are there any ways that you'd like to see the next games improve the Pokemon experience? Let me know all your thoughts down below, and until next time, love you gang.